Back to stage number 2, forum number 2, and to the third session of today. I can see not all of you have their headphones on yet, so I recommend doing that now, otherwise I'm going to be a bit of a mime for you today. You won't be hearing much. We are channel number 2 over here. So as I said before, if you feel like you're a multitasker today, you might be able to sit here, see this, and listen to the stage over there. I recommend not doing that. Number 2 is the channel for this stage. So we just learned a couple of lessons from Cheryl and Dita. We heard, in case you're a man, that you should do more laundry, but don't forget the flowers as well, and we should all walk up to little girls in the playground and praise them for their executive leadership skills. Now we'll move on to take a look at how new technologies can actually help us express the human experience in completely new ways. And I'm excited to have 2 people join me here on stage in just a second. But before we will hear from Rana and Josh, I would actually like to remind you that we want to keep this very interactive. We want to hear from you. We want to include your questions up here on stage. And you can do that via the Me Convention app. So for anyone who hasn't downloaded it yet, you're literally probably the only person here. So please do that now. And then in the menu, you can go to Ask and Vote, choose the stage, forum number 1, and enter your question. It's as easy as that. And then you can see everyone's question and upvote them, downvote them to make sure that your topics are being heard. So now I'd like to welcome to the stage Rana, who will give us a presentation about the art of emotion data and how to use biometric data to express the human experience in new ways. And afterwards, she'll be interviewed by Josh Rubin. And now Josh will introduce her properly as well. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Rana, and first of all, Josh Rubin.
Which is really, it's all about creativity and innovation across a broad range of disciplines. We cover art and design and technology and food and travel and fashion, and we really are inspired by people who are pushing the envelope and doing interesting things. But when it comes to technology, we have some pretty strong opinions. I have some pretty strong opinions about the relationship between technology and humanity. And we know that technology has been moving at a much faster rate than humanity, and that's been the case for pretty much as long as technology has existed. But that rate has definitely accelerated in the last several years. It's accelerated massively, and one of the net results that I'm seeing is that we have become really rude to one another because of the way we are using our technology. And I don't think that it's intentional. I don't think that when you're trying to have a conversation with someone and there's an alert on their phone and they look down at that alert, they mean to be distracting or distracted from the conversation they're in, but it still is a bit rude. And we're also seeing that sometimes our technology is creating safety issues. Yesterday, here in Frankfurt, I was in a car, not driving, I was a passenger in a car, and I witnessed an accident between a driver and a bicyclist. And these accidents unfortunately happen all the time and have happened, for many years. But what was different about this one was the bicyclist hit the car. And I didn't realize what was going on until the person on the bike got up and I saw that he was clutching his phone in his hand. Now, I didn't watch the beginning of the accident, but it seemed like he wasn't paying attention to where he was going because he was on his phone while riding his bicycle and ran into a car. So, this tension between humanity and technology is growing, and it's significant. Earlier this week, I was in California for the Apple event at the new Steve Jobs Theater, which is an amazing piece of architecture. And Tim Cook reminded us of one of Steve Jobs' beliefs that technology infused with humanity can improve people's lives and change the world. More and more people are starting to tune into this belief, though many artists have seen it all along. Rana is one of those artists. Her work crosses disciplines, but even though she started as a technologist, but then had a phase as a DJ, and she's always been a musician. And while she was a DJ, she was kind of known as the iPad DJ, and she can move around a room and interact with people during a performance. During one performance, she set up Xbox sensors to heat map the room and identify the movement in the room, and through that was able to choose where in the room to go to energize people who were watching the performance, who were listening to the performance. And that was really the catalyst for her realizing that if you put sensors on individuals in a group experience, you can measure the emotional response to what's happening, whether it's a performance or whether it is, well, I won't give any spoilers here, she's going to get into that. But she's literally using sensors and data to remind us what makes us tick as people. So for this session, Rana's going to dig in to this a little bit. She's going to give a presentation that explains more about what her work is, and then we're going to sit over here and have a conversation. So with that, I want to introduce Rana June.
Thank you, Josh, and it's so lovely to be here in Frankfurt with you. So as Josh mentioned, I want to just quickly go over some of what I've been working on for the past 5 years. I think one of the questions that I have is, where is my clicker? I just realized, sorry guys.
Oh, that's okay.
One moment, please. I realized I put it somewhere.
I'm going to go sort that out.
Thank you. Well, okay, I will give you a spoiler of the next slide. Most of you must be wondering about my hair. Probably the most common question that I get asked. It's natural, as you may assume, but honestly, blue is not my favorite color. It's actually an inspiration for me to have blue hair. Reason being, Reason being that blue is the most recent color that humans can see. And what I mean by that is that if you read a text like the Iliad, the ocean is referred to as the wine red sea, meaning that there wasn't even a word to describe the color blue. And considering how many people I see here in the audience that have blue on or associate with the color blue, or their company logo is blue, it's really fascinating to think of how many things we don't know yet, we can't have words for yet, we don't know how to describe. And I personally believe that emotion is one of those. And if you think about it, the concepts of technology and emotion, we seldom think of those as related. And I think that's a bit of a shame, because really when, I remember one time having a conversation with Steve Wozniak where he mentioned that the first 30 employees of Apple were all artists too. They were musicians, they painted, they were big fans of the humanities. And I think that we've somehow lost that over the course of the commercialization of the internet primarily. But I really do think that we need to rethink this. And the reason for that is when we introduce emotion back into the technology mix, we have a new color to paint with, much like this color blue. In a way, you can think of emotion data as the new electricity. When electricity was first discovered, it was viewed as a bit of a party trick. It was kind of a gimmick. You'd have a Tesla coil or something, and it was very nice to look at. But this common term that many of you in the audience may hear in your daily life, what is the utility of this? And at the time, it seemed that there really wasn't much utility to electricity. And very quickly, that was proven to be very incorrect. As I can see, there's some iPads in the audience, all of the infrastructure here, the supercomputer that's in your pocket. Almost all of our experiences today are because of the harnessing of electricity. And emotion, I think, will be the next phase beyond that. This has really captured my imagination. I consider myself to be a data artist. And I think one thing that people often don't realize about my work is that I really have been a technologist for my entire career. I have, been on a computer since I was 4 years old, and I've always primarily viewed myself in the technology world. But the way that I can bring technology to life is through art as a medium. And in this sense, it's almost like I'm using technology to help me paint. I don't use oil, but I use data. And primarily what I'm very fascinated with is the idea of creating a bidirectional relationship between computers and humans, and not simply, giving a computer a command. And I think, as you'll see as I walk through some of the work that I've been doing with Lightwave, that first step of getting a computer to understand what a human wants is really vital, and that is the right way to start to build a system. But eventually, this should be something that's reciprocal. As Josh mentioned, I have been kind of known to be, a DJ. I'm an electronic musician. I've been performing music my whole life, and I've always really enjoyed making music with computers, because I feel, to be honest, if Mozart were alive today, he'd most likely be using a computer. You've got infinite possibilities with sound, and I'm very, passionate about that. But actually, it's the science that led me to this field of emotion. Over the course of performing, I had basically written a piece of software that allowed me to create almost, I don't know if there's any musicians in the audience, I sort of created a version of like a touchscreen Ableton for the iPad. And I was able to use this system to create a more organic experience with electronic music, because I could essentially perform the iPad like I used to play my guitar. And coming from a world where I was in bands and I was mostly playing guitar as my primary instrument, it was nice to be able to have a wireless experience that allowed me to really connect with people. And I just think that this is such a vital element, and in a way, the analogy between electronic music and what's happening with the way that we interact with technology today is very similar. When you go and you watch a DJ perform, they're typically kind of stuck, for lack of a better word, behind their decks. There isn't a lot of mobility, and the performance seems very stale. And if you can start to introduce the concept of bringing in the passion of the audience, the energy of the audience, you start to create a new medium. And this is something that I discovered, fortunately, very early on. When I was 13 years old, my father taught me how to use, maybe you've seen one of these. This is an EKG, an electrocardiogram machine. And I was dazzled by the fact that humanity could be captured like this. This is an artifact of our humanity, these squiggly lines. And they say so much. So I think in the back of my mind, I'd always known that heart is something that could be captured. And as a result, I started really exploring the idea of incorporating biofeedback into my work. And this example here on screen is a mural that I created a couple months ago using real-time biometric data from an audience to try to show that, it doesn't have to necessarily be the line that you see in an Excel spreadsheet. Data is beautiful, and data, when visualized properly, helps us connect with the information in a much stronger way. One thing that's been very interesting, and I'd love to kind of dive in a little bit deeper later on, is that when we deal with data, typically in the technology space, we're typically looking at binary events. Did somebody click on something? How long did they spend? What was the duration of time they spent doing something? These are relatively straightforward data sets to work with. Whether they're structured or unstructured, there are methodologies and means that this binary data set can be looked at. The challenge with biodata is that I'm not an oracle. I can't look at you. I can't point a sensor at you guys in the audience and say, you're happy, you're upset, you just went through a breakup, you're on top of the world. That's not how this technology works. We're essentially looking for biometric indicators, physiological indicators. And this is a very unique challenge as a technologist to solve. And I certainly don't think anyone's cracked it yet, but we're closer today than we ever have been. Over the past 5 years, I basically have taken this interest of mine in biodata and channeled it into creating a company, Lightwave, that is really focused on using the data that comes from wearables and other sensor devices and incorporating that into primarily entertainment and cultural events. And the reason for that is not necessarily that we are passionate about the nature of entertainment, although certainly, as you can see from my career, I really am, that's what I've spent most of my career working in. It's more that you have a very unique data collection environment in these contexts because you're able to have a large number of people doing the same thing at the same time. That unified context serves as an excellent stimulus for a data set, which is really vital. And I wanted to put this to the test. So bringing back the music background, what I wanted to create was sort of the concert experience of the future. What would it be like if everyone at the concert had a sensor and that data in real time could be feeding the show? That the more fun you were having at the show, the cooler the concert became. So I've got a short video here that I'm going to show you. That was from an event at South by in Austin a few years back, and then I'll walk you through another example after that.
You are now listening to Fool's Gold.
Ladies and gentlemen, the performance is set to begin. Your actions will unlock the show.
As you can tell, this show's a little different. It's slightly high-tech.
Well, I don't know about you guys, but I like the idea. Thank you. When I go to a show, I do kind of wish that people knew that it was really hot on the dance floor and that cocktails would come out. So I think more shows need to incorporate that. Just a couple more examples, and then I really want to chat with Josh. You know, here's an example of an event that we did for the NCAA Men's Basketball Championship. So in America, the college basketball is a really, huge event. And in this case, we wanted to quantify fan energy. So we were able to show, literally, as you can see from this graph at the bottom, down to the second, what the fan impact was. So as you're watching a show, or you're watching a concert, a sporting event, a conference, doesn't matter. The energy that you as the audience contribute to the performance is something that's very fascinating to examine. Another example is a conference example at the TED conference a couple of years ago. We were interested in looking at the difference between self-reported data and the body's truth. So what do you think about yourself versus when you're in a situation exposed to stimulus? How does your body respond? And are those two aligned? And it was really interesting over half of TED's attendees went through it, and we got a very interesting snapshot of what the, what the sociological footprint, I guess, of such an amazing audience is, and that was really fascinating. I think maybe my favorite example is some work that we did for the Leo DiCaprio film, The Revenant, which you guys may have seen. It's the one with the bear attack, and it won, Academy Awards and was really celebrated. But what people don't realize is that through working with the director and with the studio, there was actually a little bit of a fight to be able to maintain such a long running time for the film. It was almost 2.5 hours long, which for a studio was a real risk because they assumed that most audiences would not be interested in having that much time spent with the film. But if you actually look at the back half of these graphs, what's very unique about this data is that actually the largest peaks for the entire experience were at the end, meaning that this calculated risk that the director Iñárritu took was a real payoff, and that is part of why this film was it resonated so well with audiences. I always like to ask, whenever I see a new technology, and so I assume many of you in this room have the same question, so what? So you can measure emotion. Well, all of you in your heart of hearts can probably measure emotion just by looking at another person. It doesn't take that much. But I don't think that's really the point. And at least it's not the point for me and why I've spent so much time working on this. I think really everything comes down to the fact that emotion is probably one of two universal languages we have, emotion and mathematics, right? And really, if you think about it, the measurement of emotion is applied mathematics. So essentially, they are the same. And what's so unique about emotion as a universal language is that if you watch a sad film, it is sad whether you're seeing that film in German, in English, in Japanese, in Italian. These emotions, they cross boundaries, ages. We can all relate to each other through the experience of emotion. And I think that as a species, the more we can start to understand each other, the better off we're going to be. So I think that's a worthwhile endeavor. As we're moving towards an artificially intelligent world, I find it very interesting that the word art is in that word. And somehow, as I mentioned in the beginning, we have bifurcated the idea that art and science, that those cannot coexist. But I don't think that's true. Because actually, if you think about it, artists, by their nature of their work, are already emotion specialists. They transfer one emotion into another medium. They take a feeling, a sad feeling, and they turn that into a song. They turn it into a beautiful piece of music that other people can relate to. So in a sense, if we're going to start building artificial emotional intelligence, which is essentially what we're building with the systems that we're creating now, artists absolutely need to be part of that conversation. And a way to think about it is that while this blueprint is sound and it's wonderfully designed, you wouldn't want to live in this blueprint. You'd want to live in a home. And that's where the art comes in. I think that for everyone in this audience, the question becomes, how is this going to impact your life? How is it going to impact your business? One thing I think advertisers have figured out is that emotion is a way to change minds. And if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So in this case, if you can understand a deep level of emotional connection with your audience, perhaps you can create messages that that resonate more. I think one other thing that I've been thinking about a lot lately is that a lot of people, when discussing AI, they get really hung up on the fact that we're going to live in this dystopian society. And I think Elon Musk is one of the key proponents of that idea. And that is very likely if we are not building empathy into the way that we are programming our systems. And I do believe from the work that has happened using just biodata alone, that is a possible outcome. So, I think that the future technologies need to be built by Spocks. We need the logic, but we also need the humanity. And this is not a future technology, as you guys know. iPhone 10 has emotional recognition built into it. So that future is now. And I think it's a very exciting time for this field, but also just for technology in general. So I would love to chat with Josh. Hi.
Hi. That was awesome. Thank you. Do we get lights? We get lights. Yes, thank you. So how exactly do you read emotion from sensor data?
That's a fantastic question. What we do is essentially applied neuroscience. So what we're using, the signals that we're looking at, which include heart rate variability, galvanic skin response, these are all sensors that if anyone out there in the audience has a smartwatch, most likely those sensors are already on your devices. The difference is that we are looking at these sensors at scale, which is something that doesn't typically happen in a lab setting. But additionally, we are looking at them across a large population size. So that allows us to look for the differences in the data sets as a statistically significant number that allows us to, for instance, pull the difference in heart rate or heart rate variability to indicate an emotion like exhilaration.
But how do you interpret that heart, or where did you learn that specific heart rate variability or that specific pattern correlates to an emotion, correlates to fear, or correlates to excitement, or correlates to happiness?
Yes. It's certainly difficult. I think one of the ways that we have come to understand it is that much like everyone in this room shares over 97% of the same genetic material, fortunately, the way that our bodies express emotion seems to be relatively standardized. It certainly will not be identical, but for the most part, a fear response in one person will mimic a fear response in another person. So those are the patterns that we are fortunately being able to look into previous research. You know, a lot of psychology and neuroscience is based on the extraction of those exact signals. And so we're essentially bringing those algorithms in to allow us to do this kind of analysis.
Okay. So I want to go back to the sports example, where you had sensors on everyone in the audience, and I believe at the end of that game, the home team was down a few points, and the audience got really into the game, and the home team came around and won, right? And you have the data to show that there was a correlation between the audience engagement with the game and the change in outcome of the game. But we kind of know that anyway. If you're in the room, you feel the energy, and you can, you know, if you're rooting for your team and everyone else is rooting for the team and the team on the court feels it, that has so much potential for change without any layer of technology in there. So what is the value in that case of having gathered this data about a phenomenon which would have existed regardless of whether you had sensors on people in the audience?
This is one of the best questions. Because a lot of it is intuitive. A lot of the work in the emotion space has historically been performed by humans. We haven't needed a computer to do this kind of analysis. I think the difference is that today, because we're in a world where everything is quantifiable, and that metrics are what rule our decision making, by not having metrics around even what we take for granted or we assume, we aren't able to keep those on a level playing field. So as an example, almost every venue in the world today is terrified that a virtual reality experience will be superior to the experience in the venue. I think we all kind of know that that's not really true. Of course it's better to be there. It's why you guys are here at the event. It's why you're not just watching a live stream. And certainly for those who are watching a live stream, there is an amazing experience, but it's not the same as being in the room. I think what we're hoping to show is that fans, right, as a population, they are an actor in this. They have a part to play. If you were to remove every spectator from a sporting event, is that still the same game? I think that there is a very important relationship that humans have in a communal context. If you look back, I mean, look in the ancient Romans, look at every civilization in history. They've always had a massive meeting point for people to congregate and to share an experience together. So I do think that by being able to demonstrate on a very quantifiable level the impact of this, we can hopefully preserve, what I view to be a very important part of humanity.
I have really mixed feelings about that. I mean, it's kind of on the one hand a little bit sad that we need to use technology to validate this layer of humanity, but on the other hand, thank you for making technology that validates this layer of humanity to keep, in-person experiences going. Most of your examples are about large gatherings of people for a sporting event or a music event or even maybe a mid-sized gathering of people to analyze a film.
Is why we started doing these large-scale events, and we've learned so much. I think the purpose of that being that the learnings from doing it that way are the foundation for creating the one-on-one experience, and that's really ultimately what is inevitably going to happen. But I think in order to build the proper system, you need to do that kind of in that order.
So most of the work that you've done today is limited to a time set, right? It's it's 2.5 hours watching the film, or it's the experience that you might have in the one-on-one setting at a conference where you're comparing, what you're thinking versus what you're feeling. And I think pretty much all the examples are these sort of these singular experiences. What about the opportunity to track someone's emotional data over time, right? We're starting to see that obviously we have these devices in our pockets that are just gaining more and more, technological sensitivity. What about applying your work to following an individual over a longer period?
It's an incredible opportunity to help technology become invisible in that experience. So when I think about this, it automatically makes me think of a car, right? So when you're in a car, you're in a almost perfect data collection environment because you've got an enclosed space, but you're in that car for a long period of time, and the ways that you interact with that are varied across every time you get in the car. So if you think about it, that's probably going to be the first place that this technology becomes embedded and becomes a long-term application on a one-on-one basis. And I think our hope is that cars start to become experience pods. You come into the car, you've had a hard day at work, and you
even more information, even more data about emotion and potentially help the individual or help the group. But at the same time, the ergonomics of that are really intrusive. Mm-hmm. It's fine to have a passive sensor on your wrist, which is going to be reading information, but it's not going to get in the way of this conversation. But the moment, I put my phone here, that's blocking this experience. Or I put my phone up in front of a group of people, that's blocking that experience. So how do we manage through the ergonomic concerns, and again, this opportunity with technology, in your case, technology helping humanity, but in the case of some of the facial recognition devices, it creates a hurdle, right? It's getting in the way of the human experience.
Absolutely. There are many points to that. And I think, first of all, it's very exciting that these questions are being asked, because I feel in a way, before the iPhone announcement, even the idea that ergonomics was something that should be considered was not really a topic of conversation. I think in this case, one thing that, at least with Lightwave, we've always had a lot of pride about is that we always are looking to create what we call essentially a natural analytics environment. So any kind of measurement that impedes the experience that you would naturally be having is not the proper way to collect the data. So as a result, we've always looked personally as facial recognition being something that you augment to the experience and not the sole method of collecting data. Beyond that, I think we all know what a poker face is, right? Just because someone's smiling doesn't mean that they are truly feeling that emotion. So what I mean by that is I think that in order to correctly be analyzing emotion, you're always going to need a combination of sensors, which is, if you recall from the presentation earlier, biodata is different. And that's a prime example of that. There isn't a silver bullet. Just because I can use the iPhone camera doesn't mean I'm going to get everything. But that being said, I feel we have to remember that this is becoming more and more ingrained into our lives. And so certainly the idea of looking at your phone today is not the most pleasant experience, but that's going to evolve very quickly. And I think especially as people start to get used to the idea that their face has power, that idea of an emotionally responsive world is going to happen, pretty soon thereafter.
So I have one more question, but just a point of process in this experience. In your app, in your Me Convention app, there's a place where you can ask questions, and those questions are starting to go up on the screen, and you can rank questions. After my next question, we're going to go to audience questions, and I think there will be a mic passed if people don't want to, put the tech layer in between a human conversation. But if you would rather, you can submit your questions through the Slido section in the app. I'll start with those, and then I'll also take questions from the audience. But I guess my last question for you is, what kind of future do you want to see for wearables and the human experience?
Somehow in the past 18 months, I'd say, the shine has kind of gone away from wearables. And for some reason, it's like they were overhyped, and people now don't look at them the way that they used to. I think that's a little bit of a shame, but I will say one of the key elements of this, and I hope that people in the audience have picked up on this, Lightwave is software. We are not a hardware company. We're absolutely agnostic, because I think my hope all along has been that there's a temporary skin tattoo that gets passed around, and that's how you collect biodata. It doesn't need to be a physical device. I think Josh was wearing an amazing example, or I don't know if you're wearing it today, but he was yesterday. Oh yes. Motive. An amazing example of the form factor of wearables becoming much more human, right? You wear a ring, you forget about it. It's just part of your life, and yet you're still able to track so much about your experience. And start to do that. I think it's very interesting. I do think, we haven't talked about privacy yet. I think that's a very, very vital issue here that we need to, as a community of people in emotion tech, need to think about, but as a collective society, we need to think about the implications of this. And I do think that that's why I always come back to the idea that it should not just be the PhDs from MIT that are building emotion technology. I don't think that only looking at it through the scientific lens is going to give us the solutions that we need. We need to have a more humanistic approach to why we're collecting this data, how we're collecting it, and what we're doing with it. So as a result, if you're collecting data all the time, if there's persistent data collection that's coming from the body, then we need to have a lot of rules around why we're doing that. But I do think, generally speaking, it's going to be the way that we get into our cars, into our homes. Absolutely, there's a lot of opportunities.
So the next question is, are all people the same to you? And if not, how do you measure the introvert next to the extrovert? And then I might add on to that, do you consider an opportunity to maybe help people grow or change or evolve? That's assuming the introvert might want to become extroverted, which is not necessarily the right assumption, but anyway.
Absolutely, and we know introverts have, they are very special people, and there's so many studies about how the power of being an introvert. So I don't think so I guess on the surface level, it's funny. I almost wonder if this is a loaded question that I'm going to kind of thwart with my answer, because on one hand, people should not be the same. So I think that's a very, very, very important element to this answer. I think the purpose of measuring emotion is to celebrate our differences, because that's vital. And it's beautiful. So you'd never want to homogenize an audience because you're collecting data about them and saying, okay, everybody's just lumped into the same category. Now, that being said, I really love the idea of using the human genome as an example. So 7 billion people on the planet, we are all almost identical, and yet there's no two faces in this room that are the same. It's those slight differences that make the difference. That being said, I think it's the same with emotion. In a way, I'd love Lightwave to become the emotion, to measure the emotion genome, right? To understand, yes, maybe the specific way that you express happiness across 100 people is not identical, but I bet you it'll be pretty similar. So I think that that's really the purpose of it, is trying to find the commonalities.
I want you to build the emotion genome, please. Before I take the next...
Just one quick thing. I also love the idea of your own data. And again, not saying that a company is going to do this for you, but you can use the data to coach yourself to be who you want to be. If you are an introvert and you want to be more extroverted, then the data can help you do that. If you're an introvert and you realize that your blood pressure is low when you're an introvert and you're not socializing or whatever that may come to life as, I don't think that I'd ever want it to come across that, everybody needs to be the same way.
Are there questions from the audience before I take the next one from the screen? Yes. And we have headphones that we can put on to hear you, but if you could just speak up so we can just not have to put on headphones.
So you said there didn't used to be a word for blue, and now we're using emotion and quantifying emotion and using it in our technology. How do we speak the same language? Would you recommend Plutchik's wheel? Or what other systems should we use to communicate on the same language for emotion?
I wish I could spend my entire life answering that question. That's a very difficult one. I mean, imagine to be able to create a universal language that everybody understands. I mean, that's truly a lifelong ambition. I don't know the answer to it. I don't want to even pretend that I do. I love the analogy with color, though. I think that we understand the idea of blue being very calming and red being fiery and passionate. So I think that there's some hint that we do universally feel this way intrinsically about certain colors, which again comes back to the importance of art in this conversation. So I could see it being some combination. Of course, hieroglyphics worked for so long, and now we're going back to emojis. I think people are... we're starting to try to create that universal applicability, but there's still a long way to go. And I think that with focused effort, there could be a really great solution for that. But I'm happy that you asked the question.
So we have time for one more, which I'll take from the audience. Is in the middle. There.
This is kind of building on the iPhone 10 thing. Do you think that digital content that you absorb on a...
because I can't hear you from there, so I have to turn this thing on, all that.
Do you think that digital content that you absorb as 2D content is capable of eliciting the same emotional reaction as real-life experiences that you absorb in 3D scenarios? And if so, or if not, what are the implications of that for advertising, given what iPhone 10 has just done?
So the question is about the difference between 2D and 3D experiences, and then also the potential implications for advertising. Sorry, it took me a minute to catch the first part.
What is, when we're absorbing 2D content in digital format, do you think that elicits the same emotional reaction from us as real-life experiences?
Great question.
You got it.
Absolutely. Look, I mean, if I'm watching somebody skydive or I'm skydiving, that's not the same experience. So I'm with you on that front. I think we need to kind of keep in mind, though, that a lot of the reason that we've focused so much effort on doing, as you called them, 2D experiences, but I look at them as controlled experience, is because we need to have the training data set to build the automation of these systems, and that's a very clean way of ensuring that what someone's consuming as content is really what's driving the stimulus, and not the fact that, I'm having a sidebar conversation with Josh when a speaker's having, or two of you guys in the audience, or, or whatever that might be. I think we're looking at it to isolate the stimulus, which is why we're going down that direction. But we also do know from a lot of psychological research that, I mean, just think about it. When I watch Game of Thrones every week, I am pretty invested in what's happening in this experience, right? I'm not there, but the feelings are the same. And we see that oftentimes when you look at a photo of somebody who's happy, you smile, that's a real emotion. So I think a lot of it has to do with perception and the power of perception. So again, I don't want to say that it's identical, but it's close enough that it's viable as far as the stimulus.
So I don't think we have time for more. The numbers on the screen for me are a little bit off. We're getting the yep. All right. So That's all the time we have. Thank you so much. It was amazing.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
All right, well, I'll use this one. Thank you so much. One round of applause for Rana June and Josh Rubin. Thank you guys so much. So, yeah, you don't have to jump. So, after this little trip down the lane of emotion, we will now dig deeper into the area of trust. Trust on the internet. I'm really quite honored and delighted that we'll have a global activist for digital inclusion and global digital rights with us in just a few minutes. Catherine Mayer, the executive director of the Wikimedia Foundation, the nonprofit org behind Wikipedia, will be with us in just a few minutes. She'll explain to us how the internet has become a sort of an area that is divided by algorithms and ideologies, and what we can do to reestablish trust. So please stick with us. The toilet's just a few seconds away, but come back here to stage number 1 for Catherine Mayer in just a few minutes. Thank you very much.